My name is Nargis Kasyanova, and I'm a senior fellow and director of the program on Central Asia at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies. And I'm very happy to welcome you today to the discussion that we are co-hosting together with our colleagues at CAREC Institute. The issues that we will be discussing today, climate change in Central Asia, the vulnerabilities that it is creating and will create, the water-energy nexus and the energy transition are extremely important. And we have 5 excellent panelists today with us, and I will introduce them right now. Dr. Iskander Abdullayev is Deputy Director of the Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation Institute, CAREC Institute. He has over 25 years of experience in water management, water institutions, environmental activities in Afghanistan and 5 Central Asian countries. Earlier, he worked as Executive Director of Regional Environmental Center for Central Asia, also CAREC, and Regional Advisor for Germany's Berlin Initiative Transboundary Water Management in Central Asia and the German Society for International Cooperation, GIZ. He was also Senior Researcher at ZEF Center for Development Research, University of Bonn, and Regional Researcher at International Water Management Institute. Dr. Abdullayev is the author of 3 books and over 30 articles, and a member of International Water Resources Association, member of editorial boards of several peer-reviewed journals. Iskander, it's so nice to have you with us today. Shahboz Ahmedov is Senior Research Fellow, Knowledge and Research Networking at the CAREC Institute, where he develops and maintains strategic research partnerships across the CAREC region and beyond. He also coordinates the activities of Climate Task Force of the Institute and the work of the CAREC Institute Research Conference. Previously, he was the manager of the Innovations and Scientific Research Cluster, where he supported the enabling environment for startups, innovative and research projects, and the Regional Environmental Center for Central Asia, CAREC, based in Kazakhstan, the Regional Environmental Center for Central and Eastern Europe in Hungary, and German GIZ on project coordination, knowledge management, and resource mobilization. Welcome, Shahboz. Dr. Johannes Lin is a non-resident senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, a distinguished resident scholar at the Emerging Markets Forum in Washington, D.C., a senior fellow at the Results for the Development Institute, and a senior research fellow at the International Initiative for Impact Evaluation. He currently serves as global facilitator for setting up and funding the Systematic Observations Financing Facility of the World Meteorological Organization. In 2011, 2014, and 2017, he chaired replenishment consultations of the International Fund for Agricultural Development. And in 2019, the first replenishment of the Green Climate Fund. From 2005 to 2010, he was director of the Wolfenson Center for Development at Brookings. During that time, he also served as special advisor to the Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation Forum, CAREC, and prior to joining Brookings, he worked for 3 decades at the World Bank, including as the bank's vice president for financial policy and resource mobilization, and as Vice President for Europe and Central Asia. Among other things, he was principal author of the UNDP's Central Asia Human Development Report and co-editor and contributor to Kazakhstan 2050. He currently works with ADB on a scoping study for regional climate action in Greater Central Asia. Thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Lee. Dina Ashgalieva is our panelist today. She is a research fellow at the ADB Institute in Tokyo. Previously, she worked as research fellow in the Energy Economics Division of the Energy Studies Institute, National University of Singapore, research fellow at the Henley Business School, University of Reading, and leading and chief specialist for the Tax Committee at the Ministry of Finance in Kazakhstan. Her research focuses on energy policy, particularly renewable energy, energy efficiency, and energy storage, and she has published multiple articles in various journals, and And together with her colleagues, next month, she will be launching the new book, Climate Change Mitigation, Policies and Lessons for Asia. Maybe, Dina, you can later plug this event in. Mm-hmm. Last but not least, we will have Dr. Farhod Aminjonov, who is an assistant professor at the National Defense College in Abu Dhabi. Before joining the college, he was an assistant professor at Zayed University and professor researcher at Narcos University. As a deputy director of the Central Asia Institute for Strategic Studies and a senior research fellow at the Eurasian Research Institute of Ahmet Yasavi International Kazakh Turkish University, based in Kazakhstan, he contributed to the work, to the Institute's work on energy security and foreign policy, and he is also the author of multiple papers on various issues having to do with energy security and climate change in Central Asia. Thank you for joining us, Farhod. So without further ado, let's proceed to the presentation. Please, colleagues. Shahboz, you will start.
Thank you very much, Nargis. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's my pleasure to be here today and to present CAREC Institute research work on climate and energy aspects. Do you see my screen or not yet, I guess, right? So let me do it again. It's on, I suppose. So greetings from wonderful city Samarkand. I'm currently taking part in ICT Week of in Samarkand, and so we were a lot discussing how to apply actually in addressing climate change issues, ICT tools. I mean, basically digitalization processes that could really help or not. So it was also an interesting one, and it's really good to jump to now to real climate issues. As we today's presentation is on climate change and energy development in Central Asia. So we will provide, along with Dr. Iskender Abdullayev, some insights from the CAREC Institute research outputs. So we have done over the last 3 years, the Water-Agriculture-Energy Nexus in Central Asia, and sustainable pathways to energy transition in the CAREC region, and climate vulnerability, infrastructure, finance, and governance. So basically, our presentation is based on these research outputs of the CAREC Institute, and we know that, I mean, our research findings clearly indicate that almost all CAREC Central Asian countries, also including others, so besides Central Asian region, 5 stands here, but also all CAREC region exhibiting much higher rates of temperature growth to the global average over the past 100 years. And also frequency of natural disasters is really increasing. And also magnitude of future rise of temperature and shifts in the precipitation patterns in the region will definitely exceed the scale of the observed historical changes in the coming years future. And in our research work, we did analysis of these patterns, what happened over the last 100 years and what's coming ahead. So based on 2 scenarios, one optimistic and pessimistic scenarios. Pessimistic means that we keep holding the current business, what's happening without any further concrete actions. In the optimistic scenario indicates that which much more efforts to deal with climate impacts in the region. So, and again, so I will show you now in the next slides, maybe there's some maps from those 2 scenarios that clearly indicates what the situation is with climate. So, and our research findings indicate also that decreased runoff in higher temperature will definitely affect the water availability in the region, which is already in a scarce level. And particularly, this will be further affected in the southern parts of the region. So, and project growth in temperatures and extended periods of extremely hot days will also lead to high incidence of drought conditions for affecting both agriculture in the most of the southern parts of the region, and Reduced stream flow in high demand for irrigation water will likely intensify water shortages in crop failures in arid and semi-arid parts of the region. So these are basically the situational analysis of we did. What is how the dynamics of the impact of climate change in the region is focused on agriculture, energy, and the water sectors. Looking at this, we see that we see increasing trends in many occurrence or frequency of some disaster events. We see that, for example, flood has really increased over the last year. So between 2010 and 2020, if you look, so then we see that, and the floods were really increasing, and extreme temperature is also on. We feel that, and also storms. This is both depending on which part of the region you're talking about. So both wind storms and sandstorms, particularly sandstorms, for example, affecting the air quality in big cities of many of Central Asia, including Tashkent, Bukhara, Ashgabat, and lately we observe quite often the impact of this due to it again happening due to climate change. Here we see that those two scenarios I mentioned, so RCP 2.6 and RCP 8.5. So in one is optimistic and pessimistic scenarios. So we see that actually looking at this map visually, we do not see much difference in colors. So where the red highlighted ones have more, the risks are really high. We see that on the right side, for example, the down part of bottom part of the region. So the Turkmenistan, mostly in Uzbekistan, some regions, and also in Fergana Valley, that really vulnerable to the climate impact. And while going through to upwards to northern parts, less susceptible, but yet will be highly impacted by the. So in both scenarios, as we do not see much difference in terms of risks. Yet there should be definitely our knowledge output suggests some public policies, robust public policy that could really help to reverse this trend, at least to a certain level, and to help this adaptive capacity of the countries and of the sectors, the water and agriculture sectors. These are the numbers, the climate vulnerability index of CAREC countries, all 11 CAREC countries. You see that the most vulnerable countries, again, as we saw on even on the map, so Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan coming first as the most vulnerable, and if you look at the wider CAREC regions, and Afghanistan and Pakistan come as next one. So 4 months for countries really vulnerable to the climate impact. And we see that actually what's happening in Pakistan lately and across Central Asian countries, this is really reflecting how indeed climate affecting overall these countries. Moving further, as I mentioned earlier, that climate is directly impacting the water sector as the most vulnerable sector to climate change. And here we see that, Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan being very vulnerable to climate change, available water in this country. So more than 90% in Turkmenistan and more than around 80% of water available in Uzbekistan are formed outside these countries. So very dependent on regional cooperation, so very dependent on the water, which is formed in upstream countries of Central Asia, basically in Tajikistan and the Kyrgyz Republic. So, and this makes, of course, transboundary cooperation in this sector very critical to further adapt the sectors of agriculture and water to through the impacts of climate change. Beyond agriculture and water sector, the climate is also affecting the energy sector, which is at the end of the day, these 3 sectors are interconnected. So Water-Agriculture-Energy Nexus. We know that in the past, the region has had kind of system which compensated each other. So energy for water, etc. And now it doesn't exist. It was interrupted in early 90s, and which makes again cooperation, regional cooperation, very important. And more details about the impact of climate change on the energy sector and how we can really, if really the energy diversification can help in dealing with climate changes, will be shown in next slides, which will be presented by Dr. Skanabla, please.
Thank you, Shahboz. And also I would like to thank Nargis for organizing this meeting and our discussants joining in. Indeed, I think energy is both the sector which will be affected by climate change, but also affecting the climate change. So this sector, one area which our study focus is, we will witness quite a lot of increased demand for energy in the region, because the industry is increasing, residential use is getting more and more built up. Of course, due to climate change also, demand for energy will increase. Therefore, I think it's natural that countries of the region will search for new energy sources. And also, we expect that some regional energy trade should be coming in and increased or improved from current levels. Energy sectors of CAREC's countries, however, are heavily state-owned and subsidized. Even most privatized country, Kazakhstan, you still see that the strong hand of government is there in financing all elements of state presence is heavy. And I will show later and increasingly that most of the energy sources are still non-renewables. Of course, we do not talk about hydro energy, which is also have some share in our member countries. So key issues which we found out in the study was that low energy efficiencies. I think that in comparison with other regions, CAREC countries, specifically Central Asian countries, are very low energy efficiency economy. Second is, of course, in spite of the fact that these countries were part of Soviet Union, regional interconnectedness of energy systems are issue. I think this is increasingly improving, but still it's a way to go to improve. And of course, the private financing, which I think becoming an alternative in many other regions of the globally, we will see a limited private financing. There are some reasons which maybe I will try to describe. Next, please. And then if we see share of different energy production methods or sources, you would see that major economies like Azerbaijan, China, and Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, you see that lion's share of energy production comes from coal, natural gas, oil, and less from renewables. Exception may be countries like Georgia, Kyrgyzstan, and Tajikistan, of course, you will see that higher share of hydro energy. I think in one hand, it's quite a challenge. In the other hand, I think it's also option and opportunity for member countries of CAREC to open up markets, actually fit very well with each other's energy system, which will be compensating in some places, turning to more renewable. I think this is also one interesting message we got from our study. Next, please. And then we will see that in regional trade on energy is very interesting picture and shift since last 20 years. You would see that more and more trade is going outside our region. For example, if in 2010, 96% of imports of energy countries, if they were buying mostly from regional market. But contrary, for example, 2019, you would see that this is already 20% less. So imports coming from outside of the region, and exports very interestingly also reduced. Exporting within the region is reduced up to the 40%. Means that Central Asia is actually trading more with outside of the region, which is a welcome step maybe. But on the other hand, we would see next slides and next example that demand for energy within the region will increase. And this is very interesting trade-off. Please, next, please. And then if you see that projected increase in electricity or energy demand, you would see that growing economies like Kazakhstan would see almost 85% increase in demand by 2050 if you compare with 2020 level of energy consumption. Even least energy consumption demand, even in Uzbekistan, will be high, almost 50%. So more or less by 2050, due to different reasons which I have listed, region will need 50% more energy. So this is both an opportunity, but also a challenge. If we keep a current system of energy production, it means that region will face more climate change impact. Please, next slide. If we will try to turn to renewable energy, then more efforts would be done. Like one analysis which also we look into is the carbon intensity and energy intensity of economies. And in left hand, you see that to produce, for example, 1 kilowatt of energy, you would see that almost 1 kilo of CO2 have to be released in the region. That's like the highest in Turkmenistan, lowest, of course, Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan is natural because they have more hydro resources. And then Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan are the highest emitters. If you see also energy consumption in the economic sectors, you would see that almost 450 kilowatt hours of energy have to be spent to produce $1,000 of production. So that's a very high numbers, and even lowest which you see is around 170, 160 kilowatt hours per $1,000 of PPP in 2007 prices. So this also says that at present, more or less, countries having both carbon intensive and energy intensive economies. I think this is the maybe next important message to shift overall consumption levels of energy and carbon intensity to reform the energy sector. Next, please. And then if we come to analyze the share of non-hydro renewable resources, we of course, we have to recognize that lion shares of energy production in Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Georgia are from actually hydro energy. But if we look non-hydro renewable resources, it's very modest in fossil fuel rich economies of Central Asia. And also, I think deficits of energy and aging infrastructure and unreliable energy generating facilities are creating a deficit of energy. I think this is all elements comes together. Therefore, I think new sources of renewable energy will help to improve not only the coping with demand, but also improve reliability of the energy system in Central Asia. But one thing, other important monitoring, we have found out that actually energy-rich countries, like Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, China, are already investing to all kinds of renewable energy sources. So they're already working. I think there are major projects. Therefore, energy-rich countries actually could develop new renewable energy resources. And they also are trying to change standards and principles, governance, and also market regulation in their own territories. I think this is very interesting trend. Lastly, maybe last 5 years, energy-rich countries are trying to invest more on renewable energies. But unfortunately, energy-poor countries, due to financial limitations, they mainly look for renewable energy development financing from international grants and external funding. This is two big different policies which we can observe in these countries. Now, if we come to the more or less to seek outlook, next slide, we would see that more or less, next slide, please. What the economic situation, if we link it with climate change, that I think the agriculture sector, energy and water sector are having most impacted by climate change, and economic losses are serious. Therefore, I think countries that have to investment strategies should be relooked and revisited. And mitigation and adaptation mechanisms are important to build up. For example, reducing environmental externalities, understanding vulnerabilities of population, especially in rural areas. And this analysis also indicates that climate change and energy changes will affect most vulnerable and poor people in the region. And if we look the adaptation in mitigation mechanisms, of course, the water efficiency comes first. Not just saving water for sake of saving water, but increasing its efficiency and use and also economic outcome from the water. And also early warning system is important. I think this is one area where I think Central Asia loses millions of US dollars per year due to these extreme events. Also agricultural technologies, crop diversification, afforestation, improved crop management are policy and technical solutions which could be improved. And last not least, I think regional cooperation. I think this is very important. Shahboz already mentioned. I stress that without proper regional cooperation mechanisms, not only on water, also in energy and other agriculture trade cooperation, there would be very difficult to Central Asian countries cope with this impact of the climate change. We should not also exclude from this list financial tools and mechanisms like credits, insurance, subsidies, also marketization of carbon trade in the region. I think these are all required policies, and I think countries already showing the sign of implementing such policies. Now, if we come to energy part, I would say Central Asian countries have a choice between enhanced marketization of energy and improving energy efficiency. I think this is almost, it could be also jointly choose, but I think due to economic differences, one countries could go a marketization of energy, like Kazakhstan could do it, and in part Uzbekistan may. But other countries should also try to improve energy efficiency. The marketization, of course, requires more of a developed energy sector and also necessary marketization of institutions, etc. And therefore, I think currently national governments more or less opting to set up institutional structures and national economy which promotes efficient use of energy and also developing of green energy options. Last part of our concluding remarks or outlook related to regional part. I think regional cooperation, or we could call it international cooperation, is very high demand. It should target technical, financial, and other forms of coordinated activities. I think these activities should help to rehabilitate existing and building new intra and inter-regional energy generating facilities, infrastructure, including also water infrastructure. On the other hand, we also should recognize a demand for harmonization of standards, which is related to renewable energy policies, exchange of best practices, policy making, policy implementation. I think in region you have in different levels of these different elements developed well. I think mutual learning, source cooperation could also enhance further this sector. I think I should stop here and maybe give a place to our other speakers to comment and to provide their feedback. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Iskandar Shahboz. It's really well an excellent presentation based on an excellent report, and I would encourage our viewers here and on YouTube, those who watch our channel, to read the report. It's called Water-Agriculture-Energy Nexus in Central Asia through the lens of climate change. There I have a printout in black and white, but you can find it on the website of the CAREC Institute. One quick question, Iskandar, is it possible to have greater energy efficiency without marketization or partial marketization?
I would, if it would not Central Asia, I would say easily no, Nargis. But the policies which we have studied in most of the post-Soviet countries still very much related to regulated economy, unfortunately on energy sector, and therefore I think still step by step, even releasing energy prices are so difficult. For example, Uzbekistan is providing most cheapest energy in the world. I think it's second or third in the world on the cheapest price, and quick increase and quick marketization may lead to quite big challenges or social issues. But I think in the future, more or less, you're absolutely right. Full marketization is solution, but I think step-by-step approach much more wise. For example, if you now release energy price, it also affects the food price because it's 30 or 35% of irrigated area are pumped, and 50% of budget of water sector goes to the paying energy bills. So yeah, I think this should need to look longer term reforms, but currently I would say I would be very, very careful with full marketization, I would say.
Thank you very much. Let's go to our discussants. Johannes, can we go to you?
Sure. Thank you and good morning. Thank you, Nargis, for this opportunity to talk to you all today. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Let me congratulate you, Dr. Iskander and Shahboz, for really terrific work that you and the CAREC Institute are doing on this whole set of issues on climate change in the CAREC region. Maybe what I should do is briefly introduce a complementary effort which has been undertaken on behalf of the CAREC Secretariat at ADB, at the Asian Development Bank, to carry out a scoping study on climate issues as they affect the CAREC region. And two colleagues of mine from Central Asia and I have been in charge of this study, which is going to be presented to the ministerial meeting of the CAREC program in November. So it's not yet public, but we hope that by January, February, it will be in the public domain. Now, maybe by way of background for some of the audience, you're not actually familiar with what is CAREC. So maybe I should very briefly introduce CAREC to you. CAREC is the Central Asia Regional Economic Cooperation Program, which was founded in 2000 or 2001, depending on what you look at for the actual founding instrument. But it comprises now 11 countries, not just Central Asia, the 5 Central Asian republics, but also 2 countries in South Caucasus, Azerbaijan and Georgia, in addition, Afghanistan and Pakistan, also Mongolia, and 2 provinces of the People's Republic of China, namely Xinjiang province and Inner Mongolia. So the CAREC region is not just Central Asia, it's actually Greater Central Asia, if you wish, or a really important part of the Asian continent that is comprised under this. An additional feature of CAREC program is that it has had, from the very beginning, strong involvement of the International Financial Institution. ADB is in charge of the Secretariat. The World Bank, EBRD, and other international organizations, UNDP, Islamic Development Bank, have been providing substantial financing. And in fact, over the 22 years now, a total of over $40 billion equivalent has been invested in infrastructure that is under the umbrella of CAREC in the CAREC region. So the principal areas in the past that CAREC's been focused on was transport, trade, and energy. More recently, it's also expanded into the water sector, agriculture, tourism, also into the area of digital and ICT, health, and gender. So it is now a very broad-gauged program. It has not so far focused on climate change, and this is precisely why the CAREC Secretariat commissioned this scoping study to help CAREC figure out what, if anything, it should do on climate. So let me say a few words about this study so that when it comes out, you maybe already have an idea of what it's all about and may want to consult it. It should be published, as I mentioned, sometime early next year. So the purpose of the study is to identify principal climate issues for the CAREC region and explore what regional, important focus on regional action by CAREC and its member countries and its development partners could be undertaken. The key issues we identified, we categorized in 3 categories. First of all, what we call core issues. Secondly, cross-cutting issues. And thirdly, on the horizon issues, issues that are not yet perhaps of greatest priority today, but need to be monitored and kept under review to ensure that regional actors can deal with them as they become more urgent. Now, the core issues, obviously energy, water, and agriculture, the three issues that Shahboz and Dr. Iskander discussed with us this morning are clearly there, as is the nexus of the three issues, which in the CAREC region is particularly important. But there are others. There's transport, there's the cities, there are disasters, and there's health. So these 7 areas we've defined as the core areas that the countries and CAREC as a regional forum could and should in principle concern itself with. In addition, we identified 7 cross-cutting issues: macroeconomic management in relationship to climate change and transition, ICT and digital development, hydrometeorological development issues are terribly important in relation to climate change, institutional capacity in the countries for dealing with climate change, the costs and benefits of climate action, the just transition and particular gender aspects of climate action, and finally, how do you best communicate and advocate for climate action, which in many countries still is very needed. So these are 7 cross-cutting issues. Then we have identified a number of on-the-horizon issues, as I mentioned. This includes, under the energy umbrella, such matters as hydrogen as an alternative source, energy, energy storage, and so on, a number of issues that are kind of on the horizon issues, but also artificial intelligence can play a major role in dealing with climate change, technological transfers within and from the outside of the region, migration that may be brought on by climate change. Then there are a bunch of new concepts that are currently being debated in the climate area, including the circular economy, nature-based solutions, all issues that, you know, if you are working on climate change in the region, you should be increasingly get familiar with and deal with. Finally, the whole question of what research on what data are needed to, in fact, improve the way in which climate change is being addressed in the region. Now, for each issue, the paper does consider sort of the general aspects and significance of the issue, but it also looks at the specifics of the CAREC region and what specifically are the regional dimensions. Finally, the report also discusses 3 important policy aspects, namely, what are the national climate commitments and strategies for each of the 11 countries? What are the financing requirements, the financing potential, and the financing modalities with which climate action can be supported? And finally, overall, what is the scope for regional action, and what are the existing platforms for regional action, institutional platforms that are in place? So this is, in a nutshell, the coverage of the report. But let me quickly summarize the conclusions, namely implications for CAREC. First of all, clearly, climate issues matter greatly for the region and need to be urgently addressed, and CAREC needs to put this on its agenda. Secondly, CAREC needs to develop a climate action as a priority among its other priorities, and we recommend that it develop a strategy and action plan for regional action, especially in energy, water, and transport, but also that it support national action, in particular through knowledge transfer and benchmarking of performance, if you wish, across the region. We also recommend that CAREC and the CAREC Institute work closely together on this agenda, and I'm very happy to say that CAREC Institute is already quite deeply engaged on it, so congratulations again. Also engage closely with development partners and other regional organizations that are focused on climate change, with the private sector and with the civil society, very important because there's some important civil society activities going on in the region. The CAREC can also develop a common position on global climate action for presentation and advocacy in global climate change fora, such as at the COPs. And finally, of course, monitoring evaluation progress is very important. Nargis, if I have 2 more minutes, I'd like to close with a couple of comments on research, because research, obviously, with the audience that we have today, what are sort of some of the principal research issues that I feel are out there? Is that okay? All right. So let me say, first of all of you probably, or many of you, will have seen the article by Roman Valkulchuk in Central Asia Survey recently, which identified that there's a great dearth of research on climate change in Central Asia. That is true for the CAREC region as a whole. So more research clearly is needed across the many issues that we identify as climate change issues in the CAREC region. However, my own personal perspective on this is that there are few areas that need special attention, and frankly have, I think, so far not given by anybody enough attention, and maybe that's even true more generally in other regions. First of all, the role of the private sector. How do we actually, and how does one actually motivate the private sector action to both on the mitigation and on the adaptation front to really participate, as we know it has to. So private sector engagement will be absolutely critical and needs, I think, much more research. Secondly, however, we also need to look more at the cost and benefit side. It's clear that climate transition, energy transition, etc., of course, the whole adaptation challenge involves great costs on the one side, but also, if action is taken appropriately, great benefits. There is the whole debate about growth versus climate action. Does climate action, climate investment actually support growth or hinder growth? And my own sense is that in the region, this debate hasn't even started yet. I think many people still feel climate action is a cost, it's not a benefit. And so I think one really has to focus very much on that, and whether or not the concept of the new climate economy, which argues that actually growth, longer term growth in particular, is supported by climate action, that is not yet fully understood and needs to be much more carefully analyzed for the region and then shared as findings with decision makers and policymakers. Linked to this is the whole question of a just transition. Who are the winners and the losers? And how do we deal with the losers? Think coal miners, for example, but that's just a small example. There are many other potential losers when you raise energy prices, of course. How do you deal with the losers? And how do you make sure the transition is a just transition? And finally, communication, advocacy, and education, I think, are critical and deserve attention, including by the research community. So let me stop here. These are sort of my personal observations, and thank you for this wonderful opportunity, Nargis.
Thank you so much. These are great. I think we can make a lot of bullet points, for the distribution. Johannes, two quick questions to you as well. The first one is, well, if we compare the kind of the US approach and the EU approach, the EU approach being heavier on regulations and the US approach kind of providing carrots, incentives, and so on to investors. Which one is more promising in Central Asia, or will we have a diversity kind of?
I think you need both. It's two hands clapping. I mean, having only one is not enough. And so on balance, it depends very much on the country, I would think, concerned. But look, I mean, take energy pricing and regulation. As long as you have the current energy pricing regime in many of the countries of the CAREC region, it's going to be extremely difficult to manage the transition. So energy pricing has to be absolutely core part. Now, and in addition, of course, regulation to make sure that particularly private companies are, applying in their investment decisions, applying appropriate standards for energy that are supportive of the energy transition. Again, you need both. Is my personal view. Now, the exact balance you can argue over, but it's really not an either or. It's really both.
And the second also quick question. Well, it's probably a big question, but if you could respond quickly. You mentioned advocacy, that it's important for the region also to advocate internationally, to bring more partners on board. How do you explain the importance of this kind of in the region? We understand because it's an existential issue for us, right? And it's linked to growth, it's linked to security, it's linked to everything. But in a global scene, Central Asia is a small region, right? There are other regions that produce, more emissions, much more emissions. So that's where the kind of the international attention goes. How do we advocate for the region? What would be your advice?
Well, I think, first of all, of course, China is part of CAREC, so China is a major emitter, and clearly it matters. But also, I think the point is in this global public goods or global public bads context in which we operate, clearly the energy inefficiency that Shahboz and Dr. Iskander pointed out is a major problem, not just in terms of lack of efficiency of the use of energy resources in each of the countries, but it is a contributor, even on a global basis, even if it's percentage-wise relatively small. So, fixing this problem is both in the national interest, it's a regional benefit if it can be fixed, and it is contributing to mitigation globally. Now, are you going to get a lot of resources from international, the global pie of aid for mitigation in Central Asia or in the CAREC region? I don't think so. I think there's a greater chance to argue for much more international support for adaptation, because you have major problems of adaptation, as we've just seen in Pakistan. You have potentially major issues of adaptation in the relatively poor countries of Kyrgyz Republic, Tajikistan, Afghanistan, of course. And, the adaptation challenge is going to be very significant and will need international support. And, you can argue that most of the countries in the region, in fact, are on a net basis. Yes, they are contributors to the mitigation challenge, but they are also going to be a very significant very significantly affected by the adaptation challenge. So arguing for, and this is where the global context and the global platforms for negotiations and the voice of the CAREC region in these global negotiations is becoming, I think, potentially very important. That it really is arguing not only for more resources for the region, but as actually arguing for more resources for climate change action and especially for adaptation action.
Great, thank you very much. Dina, can we go to you for your thoughts?
Thank you very much. Yeah, I would like to congratulate CAREC Institute with excellent reports. I highly enjoyed reading them, and I encourage all audience to read them. Actually, you might think, oh, I need to spend a lot of time on reading, but actually I read a report during my lunch break. I was just having lunch and reading, so it's very easy reading. You don't need to do some special time for that. So I read one report during one lunch break and another report during another lunch break. And I highly enjoyed reading them. So they're quite easy. The language is very good. It's not too technical, very easy to read. Like, I'm also not native speaker English, right? But I enjoyed reading. It's very nice flow, very good structure, very clearly written. All the important points, like in bullet points, or you can even just read through, like, even if you don't have much time, just during your lunch break. Okay, so I provided the links to them. The motivation for, I was highly interested, particularly in this energy transition report, because I have relevant projects. And the benefits, that's what Johannes said. Usually government, when they propose new policy, they need to write what is the cost, what is the benefit. So it's important for government and when implement whatever policy, you need to understand the benefits. And the benefits for this green electricity transition, it's not only climate change mitigation, to reduce emission, to limit global temperature rise, to avoid catastrophic climate change. There are also many other benefits, like, for example, and clearly written in reports, all these benefits, old infrastructure. So whatever you think about climate change mitigation, infrastructure is old and need upgrade. Energy demand is growing fast, and there is an energy security, then there is a need for more energy. Need in private investors, and for those cities who are highly polluted, like Bishkek, Almaty, for example, Ulaanbaatar, also need to some solutions for reducing in city. Yeah, so I really like that, because some people just focus on climate change mitigation and forgetting all the benefits for CAREC region. I think that will make more attractive policy recommendations when these benefits are clearly written, like Johanna said. Now, about cost is a complicated issue. Why? Because although we know that, okay, renewable energy cost is falling down, actually, it's not only the cost, like we call it levelized cost of renewable energy. So it's not just how many dollars cost 1 kilowatt hour of solar panel or wind turbine. There is additional cost, like due to intermittent nature of renewable energy. So solar and wind particularly, as a share of solar and wind in electricity market growing high, the need for flexibility, the need for curtailment growing higher, so the cost will be high. Who should pay for that? That's a good question. Actually, many people, when I talk about the need for energy storage, curtailment, many people ask me, so who should pay for it? Because renewable energy is the one who causing problem with intermittency, right? Intermittency comes from clouds. Clouds are very variable, intermittent. Of course, the daylight is fixed, not fixed, sorry, it's very well known, the daylight, sunrise, sunset, but clouds are hard to predict and very intermittent. Wind speed also very hard to predict and very intermittent. So many reports actually said that there is a need for very good forecast, but still, whatever is good forecast, intermittency will remain. And there is also solutions. The report proposed actually nice solutions to spread across time zones. There are some solutions, but still, we can reduce intermittency, but we cannot avoid it if we switch to solar and wind. So then this curtailment cost, who should pay? So you probably saw in news some years ago, European Union, UK, they paid millions for turning off wind turbines when wind was strong. And we want to learn from this region to avoid, we don't want CAREC region to pay millions for curtailment, right? So this needs to be very well planned. A report actually says that investors want to know what will happen with curtailment, what is the plan. So when was some years ago, around 5-6 years ago, when I asked the government from developing Asia, so what about energy storage, curtailment, intermittency? They said, oh, because the share is still small, actually we know about this, but we haven't done much on that. But recently, whenever I see government give presentation on energy, they always talk about storage, they always talk about curtailment. So government now very well aware of this problem, and they want to address this. This is just example of Singapore report. I don't say we have to follow it. No. Just example how intermittency addressed. The share of renewable energy in Singapore is really very small, but they announced this plan for future, so investors can observe when they invest in solar panels, let's say a wind turbine, the life, how long, right? It's very long, at least maybe 20 years. So they want to know what will happen with in 2030 or in 2040, because investment is a long term. So they want to know not what's happening now only, but also what will happen when renewable energy will be high, especially many countries committed, right, for certain share of renewable energy. They have national determined contributions, targets. So they want to know what will happen 2030, what will happen 2040. Countries have different solutions, and I cannot say which solutions should follow a CAREC region. There are pros and cons. I think what we need for government to provide all the solutions, pros and cons, and then government can choose how to design solutions suitable for the CAREC region. So I think this report can inspire researchers to keep working on particular topics identified by this report. That's what Johanna suggested. So what's next? What's the next research? So I think these reports are very good for researchers who wants to think, okay, so what's next? What should I work on? Report identified many such areas. This is just, curtailment is just one example out of many problems identified by this report. And I think each problem deserves special attention, deserves another report. Yeah. So like Nargis kindly mentioned, we have 2 events. They are not focused on CAREC region, unfortunately, but they're generally, we didn't specify region. So for this climate mitigation, anyone please welcome to join. And if I still have time, I would like just share some of ADBI research was recently done about energy efficiency, for example, in buildings. and central heating. So I think this also was highlighted by Iskandar and Shagbos about energy efficiency in buildings and central heating. I think deserves special attention. And also household energy, fossil fuel combustion. For example, unlike European Union or UK, households burn coal, right? I used to burn coal. When I lived in Kazakhstan, I burned coal myself. So many households actually burning coal. And even if we clean up all the coal power plants, still we have households who are burning coal. And research found that electricity is not very good substitute for coal for heating in cold countries, but natural gas access and access to central heating, or we call it district heating as well, is really important for especially indoor pollution. It's not only outdoor pollution, it's also indoor pollution, which is life-threatening, especially when COVID started. Many people asked to stay at home, right? Like especially children. And the more time we spend indoors, if household burning coal, then the more they breathe this, let's say, particulate matter and some other life-threatening things. And especially this is very dangerous for children, for small children, because they spend more indoors when it's very cold. So I think other areas include this also household energy consumption to make it cleaner, and access to natural gas and district heating to avoid indoor pollution as well, not only outdoor. And actually, I like IAE report, which showed that if Kazakhstan switch from coal to gas, not even renewable energy, right? Switch residential sector, it's just coal from gas, CO2 we can reduce by 93%. That's amazing. Okay, that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tina. A quick question for you. Well, you have Pan-Asian coverage at the Institute. Which national solutions, or maybe also regional solutions in Asia, can you sort of point us to, point Central Asians to kind of, to get food for thought and maybe best practices examples?
Okay, actually, one project ADB started called Energy Transition Mechanism, which is very promising. The pilot started in a few countries, Southeast Asia, which is Indonesia, Philippines, and Vietnam, those countries which depend on coal-fired power plants. So this energy transition mechanism objective is to retire coal-based power plants earlier than they should be, because developing Asia is a home of very young coal plants, and it will take many years for them to retire. So this energy transition mechanism, for short we call it ETM, helps to retire these coal plants earlier and replace them with, for example, renewable energy, with energy storage, and other solutions necessary. So the pilot started in Southeast Asia, but the idea to make this project scalable and to spread it to other countries. So I really hope that this project will spread to CAREC countries, especially Central Asian countries. And so I just put a link in the chat for the project, research project we started to complement to this project, to see what Johannes said. Who are losers, for example, extractive industry, right? How will be affected employment? For example, in Kazakhstan, we have whole towns just depend on employment in coal extractive industry, for example, right? So this is the project, and I think this, if anyone interested in energy transition mechanism, you can just Google it, ADB energy transition mechanism.
Thank you very much. Let's go to Farhod now. Farhod, the floor is yours.
Yep. Thank you very much. Can you hear me, Nargis? Hello?
Yes, perfect. Yes. Farhod.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for organizing this event, and of course, thank you very much for the reports. Indeed, well-written reports which highlight actually very important issues. We cannot emphasize the importance of climate change enough, especially when it comes for Central Asia. And that's exactly what these reports are doing. And I also liked very much when it comes to Central Asian report, Central Asia focused, this nexus approach, water, agriculture, and energy nexus, kind of, connecting the three separate sectors into one. Again, a very important approach, which perhaps altogether can encourage our governments, authorities to use proactive, attitude towards climate change triggered, events and disasters in the region, not just reactive. And another thing from the reports, which I would really like to emphasize, is the fact that you looked at provinces, right? So it's not just the country coverage or the regional level coverage. You went one level down towards localization, provinces, and then you got a different picture, slightly, but different. And that, I think, is a very good trend, which we can further push for. Now, if you let me, and then I will be focusing on kind of, on the report, specifically, perhaps I will be a little bit of a bad cop right now, right? But I want to bring this very critical issues, which I think should be taken into account, considering the fact that more research will be done along the way. So when I was reading this report, at some point, the main question that actually, struck me was, when I will be presenting, I will definitely ask a question to the report, authors of the report, as to what was the most important finding, unexpected, the finding that really surprised you when you were doing this report, which you would actually highlight. Dr. Iskandar Abdullayev, when he was presenting, he actually, being so enthusiastic, he presented all the points as they are really critical, important, and new. They are indeed critical and important. But having followed ADB reports and CAREC reports for many years now, by the way, I'm a big fan. Central Asia is vulnerable to climate change impact, and you have this part reflected in other reports. Agricultural sector and the water sectors are the most vulnerable to climate change. And this part has also been covered in some of your other reports. We need to work on reducing energy and carbon intensity. This is actually one of the key pillars of CAREC, activity in the broader region. And of course, regional cooperation. This is something that almost all actors, local and external, have been working on for years. So my question here, what was this something that stands out, something unique that you would emphasize in your further research? Okay, and coming out of my own experience, I would suggest two ways or directions, if you will. Number one, go further localizing, right? So first, there was a regional approach to Central Asia, climate, water, energy nexus, then focus on the country level. Now you took the approach of provincial analysis, which was great. But if we look at some of the provinces in Central Asia, like take Karaganda region, for instance, territory-wise, it's the size of the UK, right? Still quite vast and territory to cover. So I'm pretty sure there are some areas, which are more vulnerable to climate change, and some which are probably less vulnerable, some which require more financial resources to be invested, some which are actually pretty good. Considering this financial shortage, which is like a plague for the Central Asian region, we need to be very specific targeting, the most vulnerable areas. Having looked at the number of reports, I haven't seen a single one which would provide a comprehensive map of areas, like going very deep, local, when it comes to climate change impact, climate change triggered natural hazards in Central Asia. Something that you would identify. These villages are the most important ones, the most vulnerable ones, and the others, they can wait. I think going further kind of, local can really enhance and make this, highly needed contribution. The second issue, which I would really want you to emphasize, and we see this in the CAREC report in there, how exactly implement all the suggestions and the recommendations that you highlighted in the report. For instance, I totally agree when it comes to agricultural sector, monocrops, approach can be very risky. If Kızılar'da region and Khorezm region in Uzbekistan are primarily focusing on rice, which is water intensive, they are going to be hit the hardest, with climate change impact. So they have to diversify. But the question is really how to do this. I remember doing a field work in Kızılar'da in 2014, and that was part of one of the projects. And then we brought this issue up, actually. We identified that this monocrop culture, in agricultural sector is risky, vulnerable to climate change. When we talk to the local people there, farmers, highlighting the risk, the response we got was that that's the only thing we know, and that's the only way we do things in here, right? We don't know any other way on how to diversify our agricultural sector, particularly. So perhaps focusing on how exactly do things could be the next step for CAREC working on this climate, water, energy, and agriculture nexus issues. So I will stop here so that we can have more time for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Farhod. Okay, so I'll go directly to maybe Iskandar, to you, right? Since, the questions went to you.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank Johannes, Dina, and also Farhod for excellent contributions, or I would say guidance to us to how to follow up. So I will not take more time about Johannes' points about research. I fully agree. I think these are areas I think have to be captured very well and at least started. I think these are all valid issues. And I also agree with Dina's point about green energy, not panacea, but also what about gas and other. Only one maybe small comment which I could add is, unfortunately, gas reserves are declining. I would bring only example of Uzbekistan, where your gas supplies dropped for last 15 years, almost 20%. So that's, let's expect the same trend will continue. So for long run, we like or not, we have to find alternatives. But on the other hand, I also agree all these uncertainties related to green energy development, all these solutions are emerging, and also on those areas, research will continue. But of course, even we change this energy mix of our economies, energy efficiencies, we can achieve a lot. I think that's also more easy fruits, so-called. And maybe before shifting totally to green energy, you may improve your energy structure first. That's very easy. I can see, but you cannot delay serious reforms like price. In Uzbekistan, we got the announcement that this year a new price system will be introduced, but I think they rethought and rethink, and they removed these reforms and delayed to longer time later. I think that's not good science. I think we should not delay these reforms. They are very crucial to increase energy efficiency. It's not just price, but also its policy. And I think this policy should have a second part, which also protects more or less affected people, we know. Now, Farhod's serious comments, I think I agree with you. I think talking about climate change, myself engaged maybe last 20 years in water and climate, we know everyone talks about this. But the few new things which we found out, first of all, as you highlighted, absence of more detailed field scale, I would say, understanding of what is going with climate change. I have to maybe disclose a little bit the research which we are doing. I just came back from field Fergana Valley yesterday night. And we actually selected few basins and villages where we actually would like to understand and indicate the same indicators of vulnerability for communities. We cannot do whole Central Asia, it's huge, but at least we can develop a methodology and show how much all global, regional, national level things also affecting people at the local level. I think this is good critics. I think it's a positive. We take it and we're trying to do it. Maybe next level will be coming to this kind of solutions or localization, as you said. I fully agree. And also other important message, which I think now, Nargis, maybe due to your plans of doing some research, may be interesting. One would expect if you improve policies and politics, not policies, but politics, then you would expect improvement of regional cooperation. On energy and water, I see contrary. Actually, this warming up, or let's call Central Asian Spring since 2016, changed totally structure of this regional trade. Actually, in regional trade and energy, Central Asians are now more oriented towards outside of the region, not inside. Also inside, you have huge, huge gap on energy supply. For example, Uzbekistan ready to buy all energy, which now Tajikistan produces. But this is going to be, the fact shows it's contrary. It's actually declining. I mean, regional trade is declining. Trade with outside of region, which is okay. I think that's a normal. I mean, in market economy, it's increasing. So for me, it's a very interesting finding. Why it's happening like this? Before I know it was political, because you don't buy hydro energy because it may harm your water issues. But it's not anymore an issue, but still it's happening. So this is one area I think for me, maybe the politics to understand. On the water issues, I think, which is also, you're right, it's part of Nexus. We still don't have a common solution for region. Let's go the big solution here. How are we going to improve our joint water infrastructure? Because of this, because of absence of this common understanding or agreement, investments are not flowing into not energy sector, which is hydro, and not to the water sector, which is also needed for the development of agriculture in the region. So I think these are the dilemmas still is not addressed. I think we're trying to understand how it's going to work. So maybe, Nargis, I should stop and maybe pass to Shahboz. Maybe he may have some other feedback. Thank you.
Yes, Shahboz, if you have, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much indeed. Very wonderful insights and feedbacks to the reports. Related to last comments by Farhad, indeed, as also mentioned by Dr. Skinabulai, so we try to indicate what are the dynamics, I mean, so that we could draw the attention of the policymakers in general dynamics could be. But as rightly mentioned, I think problems can be solved only through compartmentalization, only through localization. Inactions on the local level perhaps could be easier to address. And Farhad's thoughts actually is justification on the other side for the fact that mentioned by Johannes early, that the climate issue in Central Asia is less researched topic, which needs further engagement of researchers in further research in this field is indeed needed. So perhaps indeed we and all other partners could focus on in future research on these aspects of the climate issue.
Farhad?
Oh, thank you very much. Oh, thanks a lot for the insights. I absolutely agree. And this regional cooperation is one of the key components, actually, that has been part of my work for years now. I'm just wondering, and this is also based on my interviews with water and energy experts in all 5 Central Asian countries. You know, the more we talk to policymakers, the more we realize that water and energy issues are very much securitized, right? So just take this information on how much water is available there, how much is being shared, which direction. You know, these are the information which is very difficult to get. Perhaps those governments, they simply don't have this information, or whatever they have, is this a Soviet legacy, but they still try to securitize it, and they kind of, you know, are not willing to share. So can we change this set of mind in the decision-making level, through our reports, or no? Can we desecuritize water and energy issues? If we cannot, perhaps a radical means would be just forget about cooperation and let cooperation be a byproduct of other reforms, focus on our domestic context, right? And the moment we make this cooperation financially, economically attractive, right, then the countries, they will simply go for this by themselves. Because for the past 30 years, if we look at all the reports, they all highlight and emphasize the importance of cooperation, and 30 years past, we still don't have it, right? So because we are probably targeting it. So what if we forget about this, focus on domestic context, and the cooperation will eventually come by itself? Just thoughts out loud. Thank you.
Yes, Johannes. You're muted.
I was going to actually respond briefly to Aruzhan's questions in the Q&A box. So and then come back to the regional issues that were also just put forward by where are you? Oh, anyway. So Aruzhan, I think the democratization, decentralization energy, I think, is really an important issue. On small hydro, we actually have some investments that are being funded by international organizations, also by the PRC under BRI. So there is things are happening, but whether that's enough, and also how climate change will actually affect the potential for small hydro as a partial solution to the renewable energy challenge, I think needs to be better understood. So yes, I think more research, more work and analysis on small hydro, at least is my sense, and maybe Dr. Iskander in particular has more to say about that. I think the other question, however, is how do we have decentralized and generate and encourage and manage decentralized solar and wind energy, because that is also has considerable potential decentralization. What then is required is effective integration of these decentralized schemes into the national and regional grids. That requires regulation. It requires appropriate also then investments that can actually uptake the decentralized. So there is, it's a very good question. I suspect this is an area where a lot more work needs to be done. I'm not an expert on this, but I think good point. On the second question, winners and losers and what's being done to help the losers. That again, it's an area, as I pointed out earlier, I think not enough work's been done. I thought the point that Farah made, that we need to know more actually at the micro level, who are winners and losers, I think is absolutely right. The general answer has been by international organizations, among others, to sort of improve the social safety net. Now, that helps when you have general reforms of policies such as energy pricing, for example. That may be a partial solution. But when it comes to actually specific losses of employment, say in the coal sector or wherever, that is likely not to be as effective. So you really have to dig deeply into who are the losers specifically, and then figure out what can be done through retraining, if it's employment, through special preferably transitory targeted subsidy schemes and so on. I want to say a brief word on regional cooperation. I mean, I think you're absolutely right, Farah, that we've all talked about regional cooperation over the last 30 years, basically ever since independence, and it hasn't happened, at least not at the level that would be desirable. Now, my point here would be that the climate change challenge, perhaps, but it's only perhaps, will indeed reinforce whatever previous arguments there were for regional cooperation. I think there are lots, with climate change, you have actually much stronger arguments. The interesting thing is that the NDCs, the national commitments for the contributions in climate change, none of them mention regional climate action as a part. So we really have, I think, we have to bring the regional dimension as a recognized aspect of how the commitments are being formulated and the actions are being at the national level are being formulated. That's where we need to work. Now, maybe this is consistent with what you're saying, namely that it's really in the national context where one has to demonstrate the benefits of regional cooperation or the cost of non-cooperation. That's correct, but I don't think without talking about regional cooperation, you're going to get to that point. So I think we all have to continue talking about and analyzing the benefits of regional cooperation now more urgently because of climate change than we have done before. And I think we perhaps haven't been effective enough to do so, and so we need to get more effective. Thank you.
We went over time. Maybe we can spend a little bit more it's an excellent discussion to kind of wrap up the discussion. I see Iskandar wants to say something. Let's not go beyond 30.
Okay, I'm sorry. It's so interesting and exciting. But what I just very quickly maybe comment on decentralization issue on energy and also small hydropowers. Also water saving, by the way, it should emerge as a business. And I'm very sorry, you just cannot decentralize if there is no services. You cannot just say people put on top of your roofs solar panels and it's it. There must be business. It must be really a business-like idea, and small and medium enterprises must be engaged, and there must be incentives. Otherwise, it's not going to work. It's just the shifting even poor people out of this energy security concept of the government saying now is you are independent, decentralized, take care of yourself. It's not a good idea. I think this must be very, very business oriented, including on water saving. We see now millions of hectares, farmers are investing money, putting this drip irrigation, and after one season, it's done because no one comes to help them and they don't understand how this technology works. I think this is very important message. Decentralization is a great idea, but it must be based on market. On regional cooperation, very briefly, I think this is maybe our main, thematic part of discussion, which is emerging. I think that's a good idea. Also here, we should talk about market forces. And Johan's absolutely right. Central Asia is losing $4.5 billion because of non-cooperation in water sector alone. It includes hydro energy. I'm sorry. Yes, it's a linkage. If we lose so much money, it's investment, it is lost opportunity, it is market cost, which we repeat our functions. I think that's clear now. I think the countries are recognizing if they don't trade and if they don't work with each other, they will lose. But then next comes again this knowledge. For example, how to cooperate and where to start. I think this is very, very difficult questions. It looks like easy, but the people who were talking about regional cooperation were political people, long time. Now it's came turn of economists. And they should learn how to work on economic terms together. That's difficult. For example, you build joint hydropower station, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan. No one knows what formula and how they can share the benefit. I think this is the much more difficult, but at the same time, a good challenge to work together. That's a very big challenge. Now, in Zarafshan River, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan will build new hydropower station. Still, they're discussing how they can manage it together. I think these are the new challenges which is emerging, but it is market challenges. It's not the political challenges. I should stop here and thank you.
Yeah, but along with the good regional dynamics, we have a pretty bad regional dynamics, right? With what is happening on the Kyrgyz-Tajik border and the rise of nationalism and how to proceed, because I don't see a very kind of, clear and present solution to the problem. Is it possible to compartmentalize, kind of certain areas where it's possible, and where the incentives are sufficient to countries, to the governments get on board? But I see Farhod.
Just very quickly to follow up on Dr. Iskandar Abdullayev's points on how basically the importance of marketization of the energy transition, right, and all this climate change mitigation efforts. I absolutely agree 100%. And I'm currently in Abu Dhabi, and Abu Dhabi is kind of UAE is hosting COP28 next year, right? And then when I was recently at one of the meetings, government officials from the Ministry of Energy Infrastructure, they actually emphasized this very fact. They said that the world will be looking at us with pessimism, right? You are oil-rich country, so all your ambitions and desire to make this transition is just a showcase. But he said that we are going to change their opinion about this by showing that all the measures being taken by us, they are actually a very good business proposition. These are business case which will create jobs and make money, and that's how we are going to make this sector very attractive. So definitely agree. Another kind of issue which I also want to emphasize is public awareness in Central Asia, which I think is the major problem. Most of the foreign donors, when they talk to Central Asian countries, they talk to the government officials, to the governments directly, or they imply that through government channels, they can reach broader public. At least I have this impression. But perhaps it's time to talk directly to the people, in Central Asia and try to explain the importance of these and that, because people are actually not aware of all the benefits that come with renewable energy, energy transition, energy efficiency, or water sector reforms. Just one very quick example. When in 2014 or 15, we visited Burno Solar One, in Kazakhstan, one of the first large solar power plants. They have this installed solar, power panels. So when we're talking to the engineer in there, and he said, we wanted to make friends with the people living nearby. So we told them, you can bring your house animals, basically let your ship go in there so that they can actually feed. And the reaction was really unexpected. They said that the local people are not supporting this initiative because now they are not really feeling well, and they blame solar panels for this, and they don't want their house animals to get sick. Basically, that was their argument, and we are not gonna do this, right? And this is just one small example. I'm pretty sure there is this attitude throughout Central Asian region, lack of public awareness of all the benefits. So talking directly to them could be another way to succeed. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe having pilots would be also kind of the way forward, because when we went to Kazakhstan to do some interviews, we're surprised. Well, Farhad, you asked Iskandar what he was surprised with. We were so surprised that people in the field, the investors, experts, and so on, they had very different solutions. They were all for decarbonization, and transition and more market and all that. But the paths they saw as the most optimal, to get to the goal, they were so different. And it's not clear who is right, who is wrong. So maybe, well, I guess we'll need to do experimentation and maybe kind of having pilots, kind of, and sharing these experiences can be one way forward. It's been an extremely interesting discussion. I'm so sorry to wrap it up, but we are really over time. Let me thank all the participants, all the panelists, and I would encourage the audiences to read the reports and to keep in touch with us, and let's keep thinking about it. Let's do research, and and maybe collectively we'll find solutions for the region. Thank you so much, and keep in touch.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you
Thanks,
very
everyone.
much.